Right, a very negative video today, I'm afraid. Not the kind of video that I really like to make. In fact, I really dislike making videos like this. But we are getting closer to Christmas. I didn't want to be releasing this video right on top of Christmas and putting a cloud over my head. So I thought I would just get it out of the way once and for all. Mainly relating to the gearbox issues with the liquid-cooled Bonnevilles. And really the reinforcement of my general opinion of Triumph customer care. Now, before we get into that, I just want to talk about my Patreon page. Now, this is not a recruitment drive. As a lot of people know, I have a Patreon page, like most YouTubers, where people voluntarily pay a sum of money, large or small, in order to help me keep the channel running. It's not something that I talk about very often. I don't like pushing it, but a couple of months ago I made a decision regarding long drawn out questions that I get from people in general. It was getting to the point where I quite simply couldn't answer questions that people were asking. I was being sent about 8 or 9 emails a day, on an average day anyway, and I also receive a lot of requests for information through the comments sections on videos. Now, as you can appreciate, I've got almost 400 videos up now, and when people send me emails and leave comments on videos, long drawn out emails and comments that require a substantial amount of time to, reply to in any detail, it got to the point where I had to make the decision simply not to even attempt to deal with these people anymore. But I announced a couple of months ago that I would continue to do this for patrons, because at the end of the day, I don't have that many of them. Also, they're paying towards keeping this channel running, so it's the very least I can do really in return for what they do for me. Now, surprise, surprise, there was a sudden influx of new patrons, which was very pleasing to start with, and I have to admit it did cross my mind that isolated cases of this might happen, but a certain trend started to play out as the last 2 months have gone along. Now, I should make it clear that by and large it seems to be my Indian viewers that the worst offenders, which has disappointed me, although other nationalities have done it as well, especially English and American. And that is a scenario whereby people are signing up shortly after the first of the month so they don't have to make a payment, bombarding me with questions throughout the month, and then a couple of days before the payment's due, the deleting the patronship. Now, I'm not going to name and shame or anything like that. These people know who they are. But unfortunately, this is going to have a bit of a knock-on effect through Patreon now. Patreon always has had the facility for people to be charged as soon as they sign up. Now, I've always left this facility disabled because I think it looks a bit greedy when you immediately snatch money off people as soon as they sign up, and I always had this worry that someone may join sort of late in the month, have the money taken off them, and then a couple of days later be charged again, which doesn't seem fair to me. But in order to stop this from happening, I have now enabled this facility. So if anyone signs up for Patreon now and they pledge an amount towards the channel, they will be charged up front for that month, with the next instalment taken out on the first of the following month. So please be aware of that if you are thinking of signing up as a patron. I feel really sorry that I've had to do this, but it's like a lot of things with YouTube and social media in general. You're constantly having to try and counter those people that just spoil it for everyone else. Right, so let's get on with this entire Triumph debacle. Now, just to summarise briefly, about 18 months ago, news started to reach me of people encountering gearbox failures on the water-cooled Bonnevilles. And this would involve the gearbox initially getting a bit sticky, and then suddenly getting stuck in gear with the rider unable to remove it from gear. Now, many people have jumped forward and said that this is not a gearbox failure, but in my book, if you get stuck in gear and you can't get out of that gear, and the only way of rectifying it is to partially dismantle your gearbox and replace the selector shaft with a new one, your gearbox has failed. Now initially this story was coming through in dribs and drabs, but it then started to gain momentum. This issue became well documented on certain Triumph owner forums, and over a series of videos that I've published, I've had at least 100 cases or reports of this given to me. There doesn't seem to be any common factors as to why and when it happens. I've heard people say that it's happened not long after they left the showroom with a brand new bike, whereas others have reported that they've had 10 or 20,000 miles on the bike before it's occurred. Now again, as is usual with Triumph dealerships, I've had reports of the dealerships stating they've never heard of this issue before, and other dealerships admitting straight away that this is a fault that they've had to deal with a few times. Either way, one common factor that has come into play is that when you do manage to get Triumph to fix your gearbox, that's not necessarily the end of it, with some people reporting up to 4 gearbox failures after the initial problem had been repaired by Triumph. Now you have to remember that this is not a big channel, it is in fact only a small channel, so it's unlikely that everyone that has encountered this problem has commented either on one of my videos or to me directly. The exact numbers of those bikes that are affected is not known. Now let's straighten a couple of things out before we go any further. One question that I'm regularly asked is, why do I have it in for Triumph? I don't have it in for Triumph. I simply tell the truth. If something is brilliant, I say it's brilliant. If something isn't so good, I tell you it's not so good. Now, as far as the T120 is concerned, I've given good and bad right from the very first video I ever made 4 years ago. It's not a case of I've suddenly turned on Triumph because I'm riding Royal Enfields. As a lot of people will already know, I've had a lot of warranty claims with the T120, with leaky clocks, faulty wiring, and of course the brake squealing issue at the front brake, which was big news at the time back in 2016-2017. It was a major issue which Triumph have, I believe, now solved. And I battled with Triumph for many months over these issues before finally giving up because I just couldn't be bothered anymore. And as for the brake squeal issue, I think it was back in February, March 2017, I actually made a video where I visited a Triumph dealership who they examined the bike and established that the brake was squealing. They contacted Triumph in my presence, and Triumph told them that they were still looking for a fix and that they would get in touch with me as soon as a fix came out. Now I followed that up with a phone call to Triumph just a few days later, and again it was confirmed to me that the problem was on record, that I'd registered that problem and that they would contact me as soon as they had a fix for the brake squeal issue. But they never contacted me, even though I know for a fact that less than a year later they released that fix and several viewers' bikes were put right as a result. Triumph just left me in the lurch. Now, one last thing before I get on to my actual contact with Triumph over the last 3 months. A common comment that is left on these videos, and they all seem to follow exactly the same format. You know, I own this Bonneville, or I own that Bonneville, and I've had it for this length of time. I've done 5,000 miles, 10,000 miles, 20,000 miles, and there's nothing wrong with my gearbox. Basically, clumsy attempts at saying there isn't a problem with the gearboxes because I've got a Bonneville and mine hasn't gone. And I'm never really sure whether these people are trying to contradict what I'm saying or whether they're just trying to reassure themselves. Now, there's absolutely no need to leave silly comments like that. Those comments prove absolutely nothing. Yes, it might mean that you're never going to have an issue with your gearbox, or it might mean that it just hasn't happened yet. A public display of sticking your head in the sand isn't going to force luck to fall in your favour. Right, so hopefully that's that out of the way and it will calm the comments section down somewhat. Or maybe it'll just make it worse, who knows. Now, as a lot of you are aware, going back to the beginning of August, I published a video about this. encouraging people, if they thought that this failure had put them in danger when it had occurred, to contact the relevant authorities and report it as a common fault on the bike, with a view to a recall possibly being issued. Now, lo and behold, just a couple of days later, I received a letter from Triumph. My initial thought was that it was going to be a sort of a threatening legal letter. If certain channels are to be believed, this is something that Triumph does, although I've not encountered it myself. And to be fair, I do take those sort of comments with a pinch of salt. Now, this letter was actually from Triumph's customer care department, expressing regret that I wasn't particularly happy with my T120, obviously they'd seen my videos, and offering me the facility of either them or an authorised dealer to examine the bike and carry out any necessary repairs. Now, my initial thought was, why wait 4 years to make an offer like this? You know, why didn't you just sort it out during the warranty when I was asking you to? And then my second thought, well, it was obvious, you know, the channel is just big enough that people are noticing what I've got to say about the bike, and maybe they do genuinely want to put things right. I also considered that maybe this was an opening for them to talk to me about other things. Now, this letter arrived on the Thursday while I was filming it. I was actually knocking off from the channel for 2 weeks to have a bit of a break. So I decided to have a think about it over the weekend and maybe get in touch with them the following week. Now, the next day, the day after I got the letter, I was actually in the Yorkshire Dales filming a trip video, and lo and behold, my phone rang. And it was the chap from Triumph Customer Care. He obviously didn't want to wait, he wanted to talk to me straight away. Now, Triumph's Customer Care is a bit of an oddball. They just have, as far as I'm aware, one customer care representative. That's it. I mean, MotoGP that run Royal Enfield in the UK have 3 or 4, but Triumph only have 1. And I remember one of the issues that I had, one of the reasons that I sort of gave up with Triumph back in 2017, was the fact that they only had 1 customer care representative, and it had got so bad that you had to ring up and make an appointment for a callback within 48 hours, which never ever happened. And at that time, it was impossible to be put directly through to customer care. The switchboard simply wouldn't allow you to go straight through. It was an absolute shambles. Now, I'm going to be honest, I was a bit annoyed by this call. The letter had given me the opportunity to make an appointment to speak with them on the phone at my convenience, and then the next day they rang me at what was just about the most inconvenient time possible. And all this after several years of ownership of the T120, where I'd made several attempts to contact them and they'd never returned my calls or answered my emails. Now, I had a drone in the air at the time and I was trying to concentrate on that, so I made an appointment with the guy to ring me early on Monday morning so that I wasn't hanging around and I could get on with the rest of my day. He agreed to this, and Monday morning came and went, and I didn't hear from him. In fact, I think it was about 4:30, just before he was due to go home, when he finally rang me in an attempt to get my brakes sorted out on the bike, the gearbox issue looked at, and to get a recall fixed, because there was a statutory recall out on the bike for the wiring. And this became a common theme, a promise that I would be rung at a certain time, or at least contacted on a certain day, and it never happening. You know, sometimes it would be days, sometimes it would be weeks before he would get back to me when he promised to, which is why this has all dragged out so long. And I have to say, it is very typical of Triumph customer care from my experience. Now, this guy explained to me that he'd just taken the role of customer care manager on, and I don't know the circumstances under which his predecessor had left, but apparently he'd been left a bit of a mess to sort out. He seemed like a really pleasant chap, and it sounded to me like he genuinely wanted to make a difference at Triumph, and he wanted to raise their customer care profile. because it wasn't considered to be the best. What concerned me at the time was that they were making this offer to me, a guy with a 4-year-old bike, a guy whose requests for repairs to the bike had been ignored for 4 years, and now they wanted to make it all right. I was suspicious, and although he denied it, I put it to him that they were only making this offer because I run a YouTube channel. Now, I told him that I was uncomfortable taking him up on this offer under the circumstances. However, if Triumph were willing to work with me in order to produce a video that would get a message out to owners that could perhaps put their minds at rest, I would be willing to let them have the bike and sort it out, and work with them to produce a video that was both fair to them and fair to customers. And I would like to point out that I have reiterated this offer to them several times over the last 3 months. I don't have any axes to grind with Triumph, I just want fair play for Triumph owners. Now, in this conversation, I asked him if there had been other reports that he knew of gearbox failures with the liquid-cooled Bonneville models, and he replied that yes, there have been other reports, he is aware of it. But when I asked him if he could tell me approximately how many had been reported and whether Triumph considered this to be a common fault, he told me that he couldn't answer that question at this stage. Now, how we left it was that he was going to speak to his superiors, that he would get the answers to some of the questions that I've asked, and they would perhaps put together some sort of blanket announcement that would, in a fair way, put customers' minds at ease. Now, he promised me that he would get this back to me before the end of the week, but that never happened. In fact, I think it wasn't until I produced another video on the subject that he got back to me again, because now, of course, the cat was out of the bag in that I was talking to Triumph about this. Now, he did apologise for not contacting me when he said he would, but it'd taken him some time to sort of pin his manager down and put everything through him. But the end result was that his manager had instructed him that there was no blanket announcement to go out. Triumph were not prepared to do that, and that they weren't prepared to tell me how many models had been reported to them as being affected, or whether they considered it to be a common fault. In other words, all pretty typical Triumph. Now, I think deep down inside I knew that they weren't going to answer those questions anyway, so I tried a different tact. Again, I expressed an offer to work with them to get some sort of message out to you guys that was fair to all parties involved, that might, just ease any worries that owners had. Also, ease any worries that prospective customers might have. And I asked him some questions. I said, can you give me a list of bikes that aren't effective, because it does appear that some bikes are not reported to have this problem. That might just be coincidence, but I haven't heard of any bobbers having this issue. He said he would look into it and get back to me with a list. I also asked him if the kit that has been released by Triumph for repair of these gearbox issues was a modified part, or whether it was just the same part that was fitted in the bikes at the factory, because it might give customers some reassurance that if they're having this repair done, it is going to be a lasting repair. Again, he said he didn't know, but he would find out and would get back to me. And again, I didn't hear from him for weeks. In fact, not until I released another video on the subject. Then within a couple of days, he called me up again. Now, with this guy, it was like somebody was pressing a reset button on him every time I spoke to him and he got off the phone, because every new phone call, we had to more or less start everything right from the beginning, and he never had any answers for me. In fact, to date, he has not answered one question that I've asked on your behalf. Now, the only statement that I actually got out of him about this gearbox issue with these bikes was this: that Triumph are prepared to look at each case on a case-by-case basis to consider whether or not it's appropriate for Triumph to repair it free of charge. And where appropriate, they will conduct the repairs. When I asked if they were confident that they could carry out lasting repairs, he didn't answer. He simply told me that all repairs would be covered with a 2-year warranty. That's it. 3 months, that's all I've managed to get out of them. And that statement alone leads me to believe that they're not confident of being able to effect a lasting repair on this gearbox issue if your bike should suffer from it. Now, forget about manufacturers' warranties. That is just one big smokescreen. A manufacturer's warranty is really insurance for the retailer. It's not in its entirety there for the protection of the customer. It's so that the retailer doesn't get bent by bad products. It gives him a contractual recourse if a product goes wrong, to get compensation from the manufacturer in order to repair or replace it. Because, depending on the type of product that he's selling, under the Consumer Rights Act 2015, he's responsible for the quality of that product for up to 6 years, providing you've bought that product as new. Obviously, second-hand goods are a different kettle of fish. Now, the rules for motor vehicles are slightly different from other products. It's a little bit more complicated, but you do essentially have the same protection. But that protection is through the retailer, not the manufacturer. So really, Triumph have just passed the buck onto their dealerships here. Right, so regarding my bike, my T120, what happened? Now, I spoke to this customer care manager at Triumph some weeks ago now, and the agreement was he was going to get some statistics for me. He was going to find out what bikes were not affected by this gearbox issue, and he was also going to confirm whether or not the replacement selector shaft that was being used for the repair of these bikes was a modified one or whether it was simply the same stock item that is causing the problem in the first place. Now, I had asked these questions at least once before, and he never came back with a reply as he had promised to do. So I was determined to come out of this with at least some information. He was also going to confirm to me that if I gave them my bike, they were going to carry out the recall. They were going to check the gearbox to see whether or not they thought there was an issue with it, and I agreed that under that circumstances I would abide by their decision. And he was also going to confirm agreement that they were going to rectify the brake squeal problem on the T120. Now, I might add that at some stage during this conversation he divulged to me that there was no record of me reporting this on Triumph's system, so it would appear that back in 2017, when I was told I'd been put on the list, that my complaint had been recorded and I would be contacted. The reason I wasn't contacted is because apparently they were lying to me and no record is made of the two conversations that I had both with the dealership and with Triumph themselves. Now, the arrangement was that he would confirm these issues and we would then agree for the bike to be picked up. A date was suggested to me, which I accepted on the condition that, this previous agreement was ratified. But yeah, you've guessed it, he never came back and ratified any of what we'd agreed. And then out of the blue, a few days early, a guy I've never heard of before texted me and told me that another guy I've never heard of before at Triumph have told him to collect my T120 the following morning. A few days earlier then had been agreed. Now, there was a bit of toing and froing by text, but I explained that as we hadn't clarified the agreement as to what was going to take place, I wasn't prepared to let him have the bike, and he seemed a little bit disgruntled at that. Basically, what it looked like to me is they were trying to get the bike off me without entering into any type of agreement. To cut a long story short, a few days later, the guy from customer services rang me, apologised for the confusion, told me he would get those 2 bits of information that I'd requested before the bike was collected. We arranged a collection date. He agreed that they would carry out rectification of the brake squeal issue and carry out the factory recall for the wiring, and of course that they would check out the gearbox issue. Now, the bike was collected on the date. I still never got the answers to the questions that I'd asked. Customer care department told me that they would ring me the Monday after the bike was taken away to give me a full update on what was going on, and that he would keep me updated every step of the way. Monday came and went, I didn't hear from him. Tuesday came and went, and I didn't hear from him. Wednesday came and went, and I didn't hear from him. On Thursday, I got a bit impatient and I sent him a text. He apologised for not calling me and made his excuses, and we arranged for him to ring at 10:30 the following morning, Friday, to give me a full update on what was happening with the bike. Now, he was about half an hour late ringing me, which is par for the course. I was told that the recall rectification had been carried out. I was told that in the opinion of the test riders, the gearbox was fine, and I had agreed to abide by their judgment, so we'll see what happens with that. But when it came to the brake squealing issue, again, he reiterated that he couldn't find any record on my file, and he confirmed that the brake had squealed while they were testing the bike, but it had only squealed once, and that's not enough to warrant the rectification of the problem. Now, obviously, I wasn't entirely happy about that, because Triumph had previously authorised the rectification of this problem, albeit that they'd failed to make any record of it. And as far as I'm concerned, when he took delivery of the bike, Triumph had agreed to rectify it. And as far as I'm concerned, they'd now gone back on the word. Now, he promised that he would look into it further and get back to me. We had arranged for the bike to be returned to me on Tuesday the 8th. On Monday the 7th, I sent him a text asking him to confirm that the bike was going to be returned to me on Tuesday. He immediately confirmed that it would be, and I also asked him if there'd been any movement on the issue with the brakes, but he didn't reply. In fact, he didn't reply, strangely, until 10 minutes after the bike was delivered back to me on Tuesday. In that, he was still looking into it, although there was no promise to get back to me on it this time. So I think that's pretty much the conclusion of this entire saga. Now, let's just get this straight. I'd given up on Triumph and Triumph's customer care years ago. They contacted me, I didn't contact them, and it was them that made the offer to sort these issues out. And as I've explained, this guy was very keen to sort it out on my first contact with him. Now, after that very first long conversation I had with him where he had to go back and check with his management as to the way ahead, his attitude changed remarkably. And from that point on, it became evasive, elusive, and as far as I'm concerned, very incooperative, whilst at the same time making it appear that he was cooperating. I think basically he'd got himself stuck between a rock and a hard place. The whole series of events from him first contacting me to the conclusion doesn't make any sense. You know, why would they contact me and make an offer and then spend 3 months basically wriggling out of most of that offer? Why contact me and ask me for cooperation and then refuse to give cooperation back in return? Here's what I think happened, and this is just a theory on my part, and it's the only theory that really makes sense. This guy had taken over customer care at Triumph. For whatever reason, he'd become aware of my situation and my discontent with Triumph, and like any good customer care representative, he decided to do something about it. But I think he did it off his own back without consulting with his superiors. And then after that first conversation, when he made them aware of what was going on, he was told in no uncertain terms to put the brakes on. Now, this presented him with a problem because he'd already started the ball rolling, and I'd made the fact that he'd started that ball rolling very public. So all he really could do was do what his superiors had told him to do: be elusive, be evasive, and basically just see how this saga played out, which is what he's done. Now, obviously, what I've given you here is just a summarised version of what happened, but obviously I've kept all the emails and texts, and I should point out that should I need to prove anything that was said to me off the record on the telephone for any reason, I've also recorded all the telephone conversations. Now, just to answer any questions that have already been asked of me regarding this whole gearbox saga, and in an attempt to preempt any that may be asked of me, I'll try and give you some answers now, and these are answers from my point of view what I would do in that situation. I'm not advocating that you should do it, you can make your own mind up. Would I ever buy a new or used liquid-cooled Triumph Bonneville again? No, definitely not. During our conversations, Triumph would neither confirm or deny that the gearbox issue has been sorted out on the latest models that are still coming off the production line. They also declined to confirm or deny either the numbers that have been affected or whether they consider it to be a common fault. So from my point of view, if I was in the market for a new bike of this type, buying a new Bonneville would be like playing Russian roulette. I don't know how many bikes are affected. I've got no confirmation that the issue's been sorted out. So it might be the guy that comes into the showroom before me that walks away with a dodgy Bonneville. It might be me that walks away with a dodgy Bonneville, or it may be the guy after me that walks away with a dodgy Bonneville. I've got absolutely no way of telling, so I wouldn't take the risk. Now, another question that people have asked, and I'm sure will ask me again, is the repair kit that Triumph is issuing for the rectification of this gearbox fault a modified part that will facilitate a permanent fix for the issue? The answer to that question is I don't know, because they wouldn't answer the question. And as many people have reported multiple failures after repair, I very much doubt it is. And finally, are all liquid-cooled Bonnevilles potentially affected by this issue? Again, I don't know. I asked this question several times. I've been waiting for a reply, I think getting on for 2 months, and I still haven't got it. Now, having wasted 4 months messing about with Triumph, the conclusion that I personally have come to is that there is a problem with the gearboxes. And what makes that problem surface is unknown. It seems to me that not only are Triumph unable to rectify this from a production point of view, when it does occur, they are also unable to guarantee that they can effect a lasting repair, which leaves the owner of an affected bike with a bit of a problem. Now, the only advice I can give to people that, are constantly contacting me about this, if you have one of these bikes and they're suffering from this issue, under consumer law, a gearbox is not considered to be a consumable part, i.e. it should be expected to last in excess of 6 years. So you do have legal recourse, and trading standards are the people to talk to about this. It's difficult to assess or define what constitutes a common fault in a product, but I think the number of comments in the videos that I've produced of people reporting this fault would go a long way with any legal entity to prove that it is a common fault, whether Triumph admit it or not. The 2015 Consumer Rights Act is there to protect you against issues like this. Use it. Now, as for people who have suffered a gearbox failure and they consider the situation under which it failed to be dangerous, here in the UK, the Department of Transport is not going to do anything about it or look into it unless you report it. I know 1 or 2 people have reported it. I don't know really where they got with that, and obviously the Department of Transport wouldn't release information to me anyway. If it's happened to you and you feel that that failure put you in danger at the time it occurred, get in touch with the Department of Transport. It's very easy to report these matters, and at the end of the day, nothing is going to happen if they don't know about it. Now, I assure you, I have tried my absolute hardest to get as much information as I possibly can from Triumph. They simply do not want to disclose anything about this issue, full stop. You draw your own conclusions as to why that might be. Once again, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you've found it useful. If you have, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And if you do subscribe, don't forget to hit the notification bell and ensure that notifications are enabled in your account settings. I will of course be back on Friday, so until then, please ride safely and I'll see you soon.